Sometimes life changes in less than a minute. For me, it happened in the mere 20 seconds it took the elevator to climb from the first floor to my 7th floor apartment. I stepped in, weighed down by heavy grocery bags, preoccupied with thoughts of my granddaughter and the Sunday pot roast I planned to make. Everything was normal, routine, almost dull until the elevator stopped on the 4th floor and my new neighbor, Lionel Evans, stepped in. He's a quiet man in his 50s, possessing a soft voice, who always offers a polite greeting. But that afternoon, he wouldn't meet my eyes. His breathing was ragged, shallow, and his hands were visibly trembling. As the doors began to close, he quickly, almost secretly, slipped me a small note folded into 4 sections. His fingers brushed mine, and that instant connection told me something was terribly, terribly wrong. I looked up to ask what was happening, but he just moved his lips and hissed, "Don't say a word." I opened the note without a second thought. It read, "Fake sick and get out of here fast." I froze. My initial reaction was to laugh it off as some absurd joke. But then I saw his face so pale, so tense, like a man sensing danger is breathing down his neck. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't grasp the meaning, but some instinct screamed at me to trust him. I clutched my chest and acted dizzy, swaying dramatically. "Oh, dear God," I mumbled, stumbling. "I really don't feel well." Lionel immediately hit the emergency button. The car halted between floors, and with a visible strain, he managed to pry the door open just enough. "Get out, Miss Sterling," he whispered, his tone unwavering. "Now," and I did exactly that. I scrambled out, shaking, my groceries tumbling onto the floor. I leaned against the hallway wall as he stayed inside, holding the door steady. When our eyes locked one last time, there was no mistaking it. Pure terror was in his gaze. Before I continue, I want to extend a special invitation. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This lets me see that you support and enjoy my stories, and comment below telling me which city you are tuning in from right now. Let's continue. Minutes later, sirens began to wail down below. The noise seemed to rise from the parking garage, echoing up the condo tower's walls. From my window, I watched police cruisers and an ambulance converge. Neighbors started pouring out, clearly alarmed. Someone shouted that the elevator was stuck between floors. Another yelled, "There's blood." I couldn't process any of it. I desperately wanted to go downstairs, but my legs wouldn't obey. I sank onto the hallway floor, trying to sort through the chaos. Lionel, the cryptic note, the fear on his face. What had he been trying to prevent? What did he know that I was completely oblivious to? An officer knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Are you Miss Alara Sterling?" he asked urgently. "Yes, officer." "What on earth is going on? Did you know the man who was in the elevator with you?" My heart stopped cold. What happened to him? He was found deceased when the paramedics arrived. A sudden emptiness seized my stomach. Deceased, I had just spoken to him. The officer lowered his gaze. "It appears someone attacked him. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that look. I kept staring at that note, wishing the letters would magically rearrange themselves. The paper was damp with his sweat. On the back, faintly written in blue ink, was a new message: "Don't trust anyone in this building." A shiver, icy and deep, ran down my spine. How could this be? I've lived here for over 30 years. I know everyone. Doris on the 5th floor always asking for sugar, the Peterson twins who spend their days arguing, and my daughter-in-law Kendra, who lives on the 8th floor with my son. I froze. Kendra, the very same one I'd had that terrible fight with last week over an old family inheritance. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his desperate look. I kept thinking about that note and how, had I not listened to him, I would have been the one left there. I flicked on the lamp and opened the note again and again, as if the letters might suddenly change. The paper felt clammy, stained with sweat. On the reverse side, something was written in faint blue ink. "Don't trust anyone in the building," and I see shiver run right through me. How is that even possible? I've lived here for over 3 decades. I know everyone. Doris from the 5th floor who constantly asks me for sugar, the Peterson twins who spend their entire day arguing, and my daughter-in-law Kendra who lives right above me on the 8th floor with my son. And then I froze. My daughter-in-law, the exact person I'd bitterly argued with just a week ago about an old family inheritance. The next morning, the police returned for further questioning. They desperately wanted to know why Lionel had given me that note. I tried to deflect. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he mistook me for someone else. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. He knew exactly who I was. When the officer finally left, I was utterly alone in the living room. The elevator was still out of order, and the silence of the condo building was absolutely unbearable. I made a firm decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers. Lionel had tried to save me for a reason, and if that reason had anything to do with someone inside these very walls, I wouldn't rest until I discovered why someone wanted me dead in that elevator. The following days were a blend of chilling silence and hushed whispers. The entire building seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls held the clear echo of that crime. Doors closed faster, curtains were subtly drawn, and the elevators, once a communal spot for neighbors, had now become a cursed, avoided place. Every time I used the stairs, I felt eyes fixed squarely on my back. Some greeted me with fake, sickening kindness. Others simply looked away. It was as if everyone knew something except for me. The police had visited several times. They needed to know the true connection between Lionel and me. I recounted everything I remembered, his frantic look, the note, the overwhelming fear. The lead detective, a man with a perpetually tired face, listened intently. "And you insist you didn't know him?" he asked the moment he stepped into my hallway. "Interesting," he murmured, reviewing his notebook. "Because we found your name written on a sheet of paper inside his apartment." "My name?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Are you sure?" "Alara Sterling, 7th floor," he confirmed. He wrote it next to 2 other names, but those others were crossed out. I didn't know how to respond. The detective watched me for a few more seconds, then added, "Do you know if he had any enemies?" "No," I replied slowly, a grim realization dawning. "But it certainly looks like I do." It was nearly impossible to sleep that night. The clock read 2 o'clock in the morning when I distinctly heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up quietly and pressed my ear against the door. Someone was out there, just breathing. I felt a tight knot form in my throat. Suddenly, something soft fell. A small white envelope slid right under the door. I waited several agonizing seconds before picking it up. It had no return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were a folded sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping. The clipping detailed the assassination of a businessman involved in a major financial scandal. On the sheet, in hurried, agitated handwriting, someone had scrawled, "It all started with your husband's inheritance. Don't trust anyone." I let the paper drop. My husband, Marcus Sterling, had died 6 years ago. That inheritance had been a continuous source of arguments with my son and his wife, Kendra. She had insisted we sell the family land, but I had stubbornly refused. That single dispute had effectively shattered what little relationship we had left. What does Marcus have to do with this? I whispered to myself. The next morning, I went down to the building lobby. The neighbors were gathered there like a flock of crows over a secret. Doris from the 5th floor eyed me with raw curiosity. "Alara, did you hear the news? The man who died in the elevator was an accountant. They say he worked for a woman on the 8th floor." An unmistakable shiver went down my spine. "The 8th floor. Yes, Kendra Reed. Isn't that your daughter-in-law?" I didn't answer immediately. I just nodded slowly, desperately trying not to let the trembling in my hands show. I returned to my apartment with my mind spinning violently. Lionel, the note, the murder, the accountant. Everything was starting to connect, but I still couldn't grasp the how. That afternoon, I decided to go to my son's apartment. Darius greeted me with a tired, weak smile. "Mom, what a surprise. Please come in." The house was immaculate, as always. Kendra, his wife, appeared moments later, draped in a silk robe, greeting me with a smile that was absolutely cold. "Nice to see you, mother-in-law. To what do we owe the honor?" "I just wanted to know if you heard anything about the elevator incident," I replied, choosing my words with utmost caution. "Terrible," she said, feigning a look of horror. "Yes, that man was my accountant." I froze instantly. "Your accountant?" "Yes, he handled a few things for me. Minor stuff. Nothing important," she dismissed, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Darius quickly intervened. "Mom, don't start. Please, I'm not starting anything, son. I'm just asking. Honestly, there's nothing strange about it," Kendra added, forcing a smile. "That man had enemies. I'm not surprised he ended up like that." I left quickly, my heart pounding like a frantic drum. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but there was something in her tone, an unsettling certainty, as if she knew far more than she was letting on. That night, I meticulously went through my husband's old documents. In one of the forgotten folders, I found a sheet of paper with a name clearly underlined, Lionel Evans, the very man who had given me the note. And in the margin, written in my husband's distinct handwriting, was scrawled, "Tell Ara if something happens to me." My blood ran ice cold. Lionel knew Marcus. He was looking out for me on my own husband's orders. And Kendra, what terrifying part did she play in all this? At midnight, unable to sleep, I felt compelled to step out into the hallway. When I reached the elevator, I saw something that sent a fresh chill down my spine. The door was slightly ajar, still revealing the faint, dry marks from the day of the crime. On the floor, there was a small smudge of blue ink, the same ink from the note Lionel had slipped me. I looked up toward the 8th floor, and for a fleeting instant, I could have sworn I saw the shadow of a woman watching me from the hallway above, a tall, motionless shadow wearing a silk robe identical to Kendra's. I retreated slowly, locked my apartment door, and secured the deadbolt. I sat in the darkness, unable to stop thinking. The note, the clipping, my husband's name, the connection with Lionel. Everything pointed to a truth that was just beginning to surface. And even though fear paralyzed me, something else grew inside, a suspicion that hurt more than the terror. Because if Lionel had been my protector, then the threat had to be coming from someone I loved. 3 days passed since I had last slept soundly. Ever since I found Lionel Evans' name written in my late husband's papers, I couldn't get his desperate face out of my mind. That frantic look, that note scrawled in blue ink, that warning which ultimately saved my life. This was no longer a coincidence. It was a message straight from the past, a past that someone was desperately trying to erase. The entire building seemed to look at me differently now. In the elevator, which was finally repaired, no one spoke a word. Everyone lowered their eyes, pretending ignorance. But I was watching them all. Doris, who spent more time peering through her peephole every day. The Peterson twins, who had suddenly become unnervingly friendly, almost subservient. And especially Kendra, who feigned cordiality every time our paths crossed, but couldn't quite hide that nervous, guilty glint in her eyes. She knew something. I could feel it. I decided to go to the building maintenance room where the security cameras were kept. I knew the superintendent, Ethan, a quiet, helpful young man in his 20s. When I asked him to show me the recordings from the day of the murder, he hesitated immediately. "I don't know if I should do that, Miss Sterling." "Look, son," I said in a low, earnest voice. "That man saved my life. I just need to understand why he did it." Ethan nodded slowly, closed the door, turned on the screen, and began to play the footage. The video showed the fourth-floor hallway, Lionel entering the elevator, then me, and then nothing. The recording stopped just before he handed me the note. "See," Ethan said, "there's a 5-minute cut, and who can access those recordings? Only the building manager, and well, some owners if they specifically request authorization, owners like who, for example, Miss Kendra Reed." My heart skipped a beat. "Your daughter-in-law?" "Yes, she requested access about 2 weeks ago to check on a supposed theft in her apartment." I didn't say anything. Ethan kept searching through the archived files and found something else entirely. "Look at this," he said, zooming in on a new image. In the 8th-floor hallway, barely 1 hour before the crime, Kendra could be clearly seen entering the building with a large black tote bag. 10 minutes later, she was practically running out. "Could you make me a copy of this?" I asked him, my voice tight. "Of course, but please be careful, ma'am. Not everyone in this building is who they seem," he warned. That afternoon, I returned home with the USB stick concealed in my pocket. I looked at it as if it were a ticking bomb, proof that something truly terrible had been right in front of me, yet completely unseen. I turned on the computer and reviewed the recording over and over again. There was Kendra, her hurried, frantic walk, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses, the tote bag pressed tightly against her body, and something else as she left the building. She looked up toward my window, fear instantly mixed with a burning anger. If Lionel was indeed connected to my husband, and Kendra had been in the building right before the murder, then it hadn't been a random act of violence. It had been a failed warning, and I had clearly been the original target. I decided to secure the evidence in a sealed envelope, placing it along with Lionel's note. I hid them both in the false bottom of a desk drawer. But that very night, someone broke into my apartment. The noise woke me up around 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible, the faint creak of floorboards in the living room. I got up silently, without turning on the light, barefoot, my heart pounding 1,000 beats a minute. From the darkness, I saw a shadow move near the desk. I couldn't distinguish the person, but I saw the slender, feminine silhouette, and in their hand, something metallic glistened, a key. I hid behind the door and waited. The shadow opened the drawer, fumbled clumsily inside, and then hurried out. When I dared to look, the envelope was gone. I rushed out into the hallway, but no one was there, only the distinct, lingering scent of expensive perfume, the very same one Kendra had worn since marrying my son. The next morning, I called her. "Kendra, I need to talk to you," I said, striving for calm. "I'm busy right now," she snapped. "It will be quick. It's about Lionel." There was a sharp, tense silence on the other end of the phone. "What does that man have to do with me?" she asked, her voice tight. "You tell me," I replied. She hung up immediately. That night, fear finally turned into a burning determination. If someone had stolen the evidence, it meant I was absolutely right. It meant someone was terrified of what I knew. And that person didn't just want to cover their tracks, they wanted to silence me permanently. I called Ethan again. "I need you to copy the entire system, all the recordings from the last 3 weeks," I urgently requested. "What exactly is going on, ma'am?" he asked. "The same thing that happens when the truth starts to surface," I told him. Fear changes owners. A few hours later, I received an anonymous text message on my cell phone. "Don't look anymore. Your curiosity will kill you." Just like Lionel, the number was unknown. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. A cold dread ran through my entire body. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. I stared out the window toward the 8th floor, where the light in Kendra's apartment was still on. Behind that window, I knew someone was watching me too. Someone who was no longer afraid to get their hands dirty. And that night, I made up my mind. If they wanted to silence me, they were going to have to hear me scream the truth first. The next day, I didn't wait for the inevitable. I refused to become the next victim in an unsolved case. I called Darius, my son, and asked him to meet me at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown, far from the suffocating silence of the condo. He looked tired and worried, a shadow of the vibrant man I knew. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked immediately. "I need to know everything about Kendra's finances and what she's been doing for the last 6 years," I said, my voice low and steady, yet brimming with urgency. "Everything," Darius sighed, running a hand over his face. "She's just been stressed about the land, Mom. You know she wanted to sell it so we could finally be comfortable. It's not about the land, Darius. It's about your father," I insisted. I found a paper from his files with Lionel Evans' name on it. "Your father knew him. That stopped him cold." "Lionel, he was just Kendra's accountant." "What are you trying to say?" "Lionel was going to tell me something your father didn't get a chance to say. And someone killed him to stop that message from reaching me. And I believe that person is your wife." Darius stood up abruptly, his face contorted in sheer disbelief. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous, Mom. Last night, someone broke into my apartment and stole the evidence." "They smelled of Kendra's expensive perfume," I said, pressing my point. "She knew I had the security camera footage, Darius. She was in the building an hour before Lionel died." He hesitated, a flicker of genuine doubt crossing his eyes. But his loyalty was too strong. "I think you need rest, Mom. You're imagining things." He walked away, leaving me sitting alone, the weight of the realization crushing me. I was now truly on my own in this fight. I returned home with a dangerous plan. If Kendra had stolen the evidence, she would feel safe. She would believe I was defeated and silenced. This was the only advantage I had left. I deliberately left my apartment door slightly ajar and my keys dangling precariously in the lock. I put on a silk robe, a deliberate mimicry of her style, and sat in the pitch-dark living room, a loaded .38 revolver, my late husband's service weapon, hidden just within reach. I didn't have to wait long. The clock struck 1:00 a.m. A soft, familiar footstep approached the landing. The door gave a faint creak as it was pushed open, and a tall, slender shadow slipped inside. The overwhelming scent of Kendra's specific perfume flooded the room. She was wearing her silk robe, the very same one I had seen that shadow wearing on the 8th floor. She stopped, slowly scanning the empty room, clearly searching for me. "I knew it was you," I whispered from the corner where I was hidden. She spun around, startled, and the dim street lamp light caught the terrifying expression on her face, pure, naked fury. "Mother-in-law, you are far smarter than I gave you credit for," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. In her hand, something shone dangerously, a long, sharp letter opener. "You should have stayed out of this. You should have just sold the land. It wasn't ever about the land, was it, Kendra?" I said, standing up slowly, gripping the gun. "It was always about Marcus's will. Marcus was going to leave everything to you, but only if you remained married to him. If he died, I inherited everything through Darius." She shouted, the silk of her robe rustling as she took a menacing step forward. "But your husband found out I was cheating, and he was planning to change his will to include an impossible condition that would prevent me from inheriting a single penny. Lionel was the one who drafted that change. And you killed him to stop the change from becoming final," I concluded, the full truth hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "I tried to kill you first in that elevator," she spat. "But that stupid accountant ruined everything. He gave you the note, then he ran like a coward. I caught him in the parking garage and I finished him off." She raised the letter opener. "And now I'm finishing you, Alara." I already screamed the truth. "Kendra," I said, raising the revolver, aiming it steady. "You just didn't realize who was truly listening." Rage coursed through my body like fire. For years, I had believed my husband's death was a cruel twist of fate. But now, I understood that someone had pushed him toward that end. Kendra, the woman who married my son for convenience, the one who smiled while robbing me, the one who murdered my husband and then wanted to get rid of me. My hands trembled. For a moment, hatred blurred my vision, but I took a deep breath. If I learned anything in life, it's that rage without intelligence is a weapon that shoots itself. And I wasn't going to make that mistake. I decided to host a family dinner. It was a calculated move, something I hadn't done since before Marcus's death. I called Darius with the sweetest voice I could fake. "Son, we haven't had dinner together in a while. I'd like to invite you both over. Are you sure, Mom?" "Kendra might not. Just tell her it will be a quiet dinner, just family." When I hung up, I took a deep breath. Quiet, I thought. It will be anything but. That night, I sat at the table and observed every detail. White tablecloth, clean glasses, lit candles. Nothing should look out of the ordinary. But under the tablecloth, in a black folder, rested the evidence, the documents my husband had saved. The photos, the recordings, and the copies Ethan had recovered from the system. When the doorbell rang, my heart leaped. Darius entered first, smiling nervously. Behind him was Kendra in her red dress, and that calculated look that always reminded me of a cat watching its prey. "Everything looks so nice, mother-in-law," she said, touching the china with her fingers. "I didn't know you still felt like celebrating anything." "There's always something to celebrate, daughter," I replied, matching her coldness. Especially when the masks start to fall off, she smiled, still not understanding. The special guest arrived a few minutes later, Ethan, and who is this? Kendra asked, annoyed. "A family friend," I said. "He's been a great help to me lately." The atmosphere was thick. We ate between strained bites and subtle glares. I waited for the right moment. When Kendra poured the wine, I noticed her hands barely tremble, a minimal sign, but enough for me to know something was bothering her. "Darius," I said aloud, feigning a small smile. "Do you remember the man in the elevator?" He nodded uncomfortably. "Why do you bring him up?" "Because I've learned something interesting." I took the black folder from the drawer and placed it on the table. Kendra went deathly pale. "What is that?" she asked, her composure finally breaking. "The truth," I replied. Ethan turned on his laptop and projected an image onto the wall, one of the recovered recordings. It clearly showed Kendra entering the maintenance room, replacing a USB drive. Darius jumped up. "What does this mean?" "It means," I replied, turning to Kendra, "that someone erased the recordings that could prove who killed Lionel Evans." Kendra tried to maintain control. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do," I said firmly. "Lionel worked with Marcus. And when your father-in-law discovered your fraud, you silenced him." Silence fell like a hammer blow. Darius put his hands to his head. "Kendra, tell me it's not true." "Of course not," she screamed. "That recording is fake." Ethan looked at her without blinking. "It might be, if I didn't also have the financial files she modified and the transfers made in her name." Kendra lost all color. She tried to stand up, but Darius stopped her. "What did you do, Kendra?" She didn't answer. She just collapsed, covering her face with her hands and beginning to sob uncontrollably. I watched her in silence. I felt neither relief nor triumph, only a deep, profound sadness. The living room phone suddenly rang. Ethan answered and handed it to me. On the other end, an unknown voice said, "It's done. The file has been delivered." "She won't be leaving the country." I hung up without saying a word. Kendra looked at me, terrified. "What did you do?" "Nothing you don't deserve," I replied. "I just returned the favor you gave me in the elevator." That night, when the officers took her away, the entire building came out into the hallway. No one said anything. They just watched as the woman in the red dress was led down the stairs in handcuffs. Ethan approached me and said, "Did you do the right thing, ma'am?" "No," I replied. "I did what was necessary." Resolution and final thoughts the weeks that followed were a parade of police, lawyers, and curious neighbors. The building filled with rumors. I learned not to listen. But one morning when I went down to the mailbox, I found an envelope with no sender's address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for believing in me until the end." I couldn't help but smile. It was his handwriting, trembling, hurried, but unmistakable. In time, Darius was sentenced to a reduced term after the shocking twist that he was also involved in Lionel's death, which I won't detail here as the original script made him confess. The judge considered that there was no intent to kill. I attended the trial every day, sitting in the back row, not to judge him, but to support him. 2 years later, when he was released, he came to see me. He had aged, but his eyes held a new, humble light. We hugged for a long time. We didn't talk about the past. It was no longer necessary. Forgiveness had ceased to be a word and had become a place where both of us could breathe. "And what will you do now?" I asked him. "Leave," he replied. "Start somewhere else," but this time without lies. As he left, I watched him walk down the building hallway. Only now he wasn't running away. He was seeking to live again. I looked after him. "Honey," I told my husband's portrait. I let him save himself. I understood that sometimes the purest love consists of letting children pay for their own mistakes. I looked at the city lights and thought about what we had lived through. How life can be twisted by a single decision. How love and guilt can get confused, and how in spite of everything, there is always a way to find redemption. Thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, life, because I understood that it's not about how much pain we can endure, but about how much love we are capable of preserving after losing everything.
This story was the result of pain, betrayal, and a mother's immense love. But the story isn't quite finished yet. The characters of this narrative, Alara Sterling, Darius, and Lionel, want to know your honest opinion. Tell them, whose decision do you think was right, and which turning point was the most painful? Every one of your opinions will reach them and give new meaning to this journey. Comment your city below and be sure to share your valuable thoughts with us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.